You're listening to Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast.
When your heart is aching and your world is shaking, don't give up. No, don't give up.
Hello and welcome to Oh My Health, There Is Hope, the podcast. I'm your host, Jana Short, and today I'm here with my very special guest, Judith Finlayson. That's like a tongue twister, and I love it.
I know.
Judith is a best-selling author who has written books on a variety of subjects, from personal well-being and women's history to food and nutrition. A former national newspaper columnist from the Globe and Mail magazine journalist, and board member of various organizations focusing on legal, medical, and women's issues. She is also the author of over a dozen cookbooks. She resides in Toronto, Canada, and I am so grateful I met her and I was able to bring her on this show. So Judith, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, I am so excited to have you. You started telling me a little bit about the messages that you have, and I really wanted to cut you off because it was so good. I did not want to get it not recorded. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind sharing a story of hope, because I believe that our stories are so powerful. They change, they evolve, and they literally bring us to right where we're at right now. So do you want to do that?
You know, you're absolutely correct. I am someone who really took charge of my own health. I started to about 20 years ago when I had a brush with breast cancer. And that really got me interested in nutrition. And over the years, researching nutrition and researching positive lifestyle changes really got me into the whole area of the subject of my book, You Are What Your Grandparents Ate. And rather than a personal note of hope, because I do think I am a walking example of someone, I haven't had major health crises, but I have taken care of my health, don't take any medications, and I really focus on having a positive lifestyle. Which includes diet and exercise. But I want to really talk about the message in You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, because it's an overarching message that everyone can tap into. And the basic approach that book takes is that it looks at the fact that there's nothing you can do about your genes. You're born with your genes. So 20 years ago, so much medical research was focused on figuring out what genes you had so that we could provide specific things to counteract those things. Over the probably following 10 years after they mapped the human genome, they realized that genes were not the answer, that in fact, you were born with your genes, but how your genes express themselves is really what determines your health. And you are in control of how your genes express themselves. And there's a lot of really heavy duty science behind that. But the basic message is probably one that your grandmother told you, which is eat good food, get adequate exercise, and try and manage your stress. And if you do those three things, you can really change how your genes express themselves, and all of the pathways in your body will be working toward promoting good health.
So I'm gonna dive in a little bit with how your genes express yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? Because I tested positive for the BRCA gene. Let's just take that. So I tested positive for the BRCA gene. I'm literally the only female on my dad's side still alive who hasn't died from ovarian or breast cancer. So I choose to do the radical mastectomy, hysterectomy, only because I was already past childbearing years. I was in my 50s. I did not want to have to wait for that other shoe to drop. I realized it may never have happened, but I wanted to get ahead of that. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means on how maybe mine would never have expressed themselves in forming into a cancer?
They might not. The BRCA gene is that there are some that are more serious than others. Most diseases are multifactorial, which means that they are the result of a number of multiple genes that work together and that promote them. So the risk is spread across many different genes, and each plays only a small part in whether you will actually get the disease. The BRCA gene is in one of those classes that is much higher up on the scale. But when they really looked at how much do we owe to nature, our genes, and how much we owe to nurture, which is the environment, somebody did recently, about 2 years ago, a whole genome-wide association study, and found that only 5 to 10% of diseases really resulted from a direct genetic component, and the rest was really lifestyle modifications. Now, the other thing that we should realize, and this comes out a lot in terms of people like fat shaming and people being blamed for being overweight. And actually I did a radio show recently, and somebody phoned in and said, you know, people are fat, it's their own fault, they eat too much junk food. Well, that can be true. Junk food does pack on the weight. But in fact, your metabolism is often programmed before you were born. And so the message of you are what your grandparents ate is not a tragic one. It's not that, you know, you inherited all of these problems. It's really what you can do to solve them. And so if you look at, I can give you examples of how, you know, you have your genes, and then you have these epigenetic modifications that are also passed on through the generations. One of the most actively studied areas in terms of some of the stress genes being passed on is in Holocaust survivors, because that was where a researcher named Rachel Yehuda started to study survivors of the Holocaust, and she found out that actually their children were exhibiting more symptoms. How that happens is that both the sperm cell and the egg, when they unite, carry what are in fact biological memories that become as a result of genes expressions that are passed on. So things like when boys' sperm cells are forming, if they smoke, they found that their grandsons and sons in some cases were more likely to be obese or to suffer from metabolic conditions. It's easier to see in females because the egg, the baby is growing inside the mother. But what we forget is that if that fetus is a girl, those eggs are forming while she is still in her mother's stomach. And so the air her mother breathes, the water she drinks, has an effect, the food that she eats. Poor nutrition is probably the key component of some of these negative epigenetic changes that predispose people, for instance, for things like metabolic conditions or predisposition to being overweight. But what you can do through a healthy diet, through positive lifestyle modifications like stress control, or exercise is change the gene expression, change how your genes are expressed, and you can counteract some of these areas.
So I first of all love that you explained all that, because that is so true that we do fat shame. And when I look at my generation, my mom, my grandmother, at the same age I am now, we basically all have the same body type. And we basically, I would say we're definitely aging better, but I think it's because there's so much that we're aware of now. I mean, when my mom had me, it was okay to smoke and drink during pregnancy. And then when I had my children, even though that memory, that biological memory is still with me, I, of course, didn't smoke or drink.
Yes. Yes. No, it's amazing of how much of that. I'm of the generation too when mothers smoke and drank, and you know, most of us seem to be okay.
Of course.
So you know, my daughter is pregnant right now, and you know, she doesn't drink at all, and neither do her friends. So it's an interesting thing. But if we take, you know, if we take something like aging, you can see in things like the epigenetic clock, where they measure, this is a scientific thing, and they measure a level of an epigenetic process called DNA methylation, and they can determine whether you are older or younger than your biological age, i.e. your cells are older or younger. And, you know, at its simplest, we know that things like exercise improve methylation and slow down the epigenetic clock. Similarly, your telomeres are parts of the cell. They're the frayed, they're the ends, and they get frayed as you age. And they're now doing studies that have showed that positive, you know, a better diet, exercise slows down the rate at which your telomeres fade. So it helps to keep them long, and it helps to keep you young. So when they look at things like, you know, people in the blue zones where they live, you know, it's not unusual to find someone who's 100 and is still out walking around and enjoying life, you know, not in a home and a wheelchair. They find that things like the Mediterranean diet have really played a very significant role in building the kind of resilience and hardiness that enables you to live to be 100 and still be active and involved. So it all fits together.
You know, I've been in some of those blue zones, and let me tell you, I would see 80-year-olds walking. They walk everywhere, and they've got bags of groceries, and it's not flat land. They're walking up the hills to their house. They are active. Like they just don't seem to slow down. And I know that has a huge part of it, because when your body stops moving, it stops thriving. And I just couldn't believe that I was getting winded walking up a hill, and here comes this 80-year-old man with his bags of groceries walking right past me. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like they have it, like they have figured it out for sure.
Yeah, and you know, they've been studied thoroughly, and really you know, as I said, it's hard science that's telling us how this works, but actually the what works, we've probably known forever, and that's a healthy diet, adequate exercise. Social involvement is one. These people in the blue zones are parts of their communities, and they have friends, and I mean, you see them out, you know, playing cards, or, you know, up and down the hill with their groceries, as you put it. It's a very, very healthy lifestyle. They're not getting in their car to drive a mile to do their grocery shopping. So
I love it. One of the other things I was wondering if maybe you could touch on a little bit is I just know that people in my age group, they all freak out about Alzheimer's, right? Losing the brain health that they had, or, they start getting foggier. Their brain starts moving slower. I remember running to the neurologist because I forgot what I had for dinner one night. And then I drove somewhere and I was like, I don't remember driving here. Apparently that's all extremely normal because our body goes on autopilot. And if I ask even a young person, what'd you eat last night for dinner? They would probably have to pause and think about that. And he's like, you're fine. But we start freaking out. Like, how are there ways that we can keep our brains healthier, that we can not reverse that, but prolong it, give them what they need to keep being fueled?
Well, absolutely. And Alzheimer's is one of the things that they're really looking at. And it really, healthy nutrition, omega-3 fatty acids are very, very good for brain health. So, wild salmon is probably one of the best sources of that, trout, oily fish. You're absolutely right, but things like legumes, whole grains, healthy fats, anti-fighting inflammation. Inflammation is a big component of Alzheimer's and all of the degrees of aging. They now have a term for it, inflammaging, because supposedly it's so common as we age to become more inflamed. But diets like the Mediterranean diet I keep talking about because it's the one that has been most studied. And a Mediterranean diet, I had someone say to me once, well, I don't live in the Mediterranean, I don't have those foods. But what it really means is lots of plant foods, fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, healthy oils like olive oil. Olive oil has been actually studied as a unique ingredient that can positively affect gene expression and help to build resilience. All of those things really work. The other thing that we haven't really touched on is your microbiome. And that is the collection of bacteria that live in and on your body. The gut microbiome is an area of really active study, so much so that it's hard to keep on top of all the stuff that's coming in. But we talked about weight and changing your metabolism. Because metabolic, it's not just for your appearance. Metabolic disease has been identified as one of the major killers nowadays, and it's one of the things that is undermining our lifespan, the high rate of metabolic diseases. They're studying particular bacteria, gut bacteria, called Akkermansia municophila, and they have shown that certain polyphenols in food, so that would be components of leafy greens, capsaicin, the substance in chili peppers and so on, can increase the quantities of this particular bacteria, which also has been shown to help to fight obesity and keep you thin. So people who are svelte tend to have higher rates of this particular bacteria. So once again, a healthy diet that nurtures your gut bacteria by the production of things like fiber or polyphenols can help to generate these types of bacteria that work to keep you healthy, right from your brain, top of your brain to the tips of your toes, but also help to keep you in a very healthy weight.
One of the things that I refer to the gut all the time is our second brain, and it's really just as important. And having said that, people who know me and know my story know that I had to have my gut completely removed because of having gastroparesis. And so for me to continually thrive in that diagnosis, I have to really pay attention to what I'm putting in my body, how it's absorbing, and creating as much of that through diet as possible. So you'll see me constantly having a drink filled with greens and whatever my body needs so that my body can absorb it, because it doesn't absorb if I were to chew it and swallow it. But it's 100% a major key to changing the outcome of whatever your health might look like. The other thing I know that we hadn't touched on is, I know that when I went to see my neurologist, one of the things he said was key for maintaining mental health and mental clarity and feeding your body what it needs is being hydrated. And none of us really drink enough water. Like, we just don't. We're grabbing a soda, a coffee, a whatever, but we're really not giving our body the fluids it needs. So I know if I start getting a headache, or I'm a little tired or a little foggy, if I literally just drink a glass or two of water, I get that charge that I need.
Yeah, hydration is very important, and so is sleep. When you mention Alzheimer's, one of the kind of growing areas in looking at that disease is its connection with diabetes. Some people there are some types of Alzheimer's that they're now calling type 3 diabetes. So preventing diabetes is one of, it's a metabolic thing. So it's one of those conditions that if you step back, that you can really work on improving by improving your metabolism, by, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but really it's very, very simple. A nutritious diet, good exercise. We now have all of this evidence on Akkermansia muciniphila. So generating that bacteria in your gut by eating things like leafy greens, will help to keep your metabolism ticking, and will help over the long run to keep Alzheimer's at bay.
I think that if you're just listening to this, it could be overwhelming, right? But here's the thing. It's super simple. You take one step. You start making better choices when you eat. You start getting active. You start hydrating. You start sleeping better. If I had any message to tell my younger self, it would literally be all those things, because your younger self is like, I'm fine. It'll just keep moving, right? And then one day your younger self catches up and meets your older self. And you're reversing, like, wish I would have done this sooner. So for the younger people, I would strongly recommend that you start being very aware of those choices now, because I really wish I had. The one message I would tell my younger self and all of you is just start taking note of that now. My older self, who I am now, I constantly am taking one new step all the time, right? Just one step, making a better choice for myself, remembering to switch out coffee for water, to make those little choices to, stay healthy, to give my body what it needs to regenerate, do the things it needs to do. And I will be really honest, when you were talking about Alzheimer's, and I was thinking I freaked out a little bit when I couldn't remember something, I never really had any history of Alzheimer's in my family, because none of them lived that long. Like, they didn't. I started thinking that my grandparents, my parents, they all died in their 50s, 60s of coronary disease or whatever. And here I am thriving in my 60s, because I'm trying to be aware and make those little choices. So I will be the first one who'll get to 90 or 100, and I'll let you know then if we have Alzheimer's issue genetically.
That would be great. And you're absolutely correct. And you're also, you were mentioning earlier our mothers and so on. It's kind of a cliche, but like 60 is, the new 40. And I wonder, because I don't think as many of us got on the healthy living bandwagon as early as we ought to have, to really enjoy the fruits, but I guess early enough. And if I can say, if there's one don't that you shouldn't do, it's don't eat processed foods. The evidence is just overwhelming on how bad they are for you. And if you just focus in on the microbiome, for instance, they've done studies that showed that just a week of a fast food diet destroyed the diversity in the subject's gut, and bacterial diversity is one of the components, the key component of a healthy gut, that's doing all these wonderful things for you, like helping to keep your metabolism working well, helping to battle Alzheimer's. You know, just a week on a processed food diet, and it really, you know, went south. So that's the don't. The positive, and they're easy changes you can make. Like people say, well, I don't have time to eat healthy. Well, do you have time to have things like a good whole grain cereal in the morning? You know, make some oatmeal, or I mean, you can cook it in a slow cooker overnight, so you have a big pot of it if you're feeding your family. Or a good artisanal granola with nuts and seeds and, you know, all of those very, very nutritious whole grain type things. And that's very easy to do. And that's one step. You know, a fresh pressed juice is full of nutrients, and it's a very compressed way of getting a whole bunch of nutrients very quickly and hydrating you as well.
Well, I will tell you, meal prep for me has been a lifesaver, literally. And I am an oatmeal junkie, and I put some oatmeal, some coconut milk, some chia seeds, flax seeds in the overnight container in the refrigerator. And when I come out in the morning, I throw some berries on it and it's good to go. So easy. You have time for that. You definitely have time for that. And by the way, if you don't have time for that, then you better make some time for some illness coming into your life. And I promise you won't want to make time for that.
Yeah, well, illness isn't fun, and you're quite right. Having a whole grain breakfast, which is really good for so many things because there's so many nutrients for starters, and it's also whole grains have been shown to be one of the great foods for creating gut diversity and for nurturing all of those friendly little bacteria in your gut. And then they do all kinds of wonderful things for you, because if you feed them well, they produce what's known as metabolites, like short chain fatty acids, that have all kinds of health benefits throughout your body. So it really becomes a win-win situation. If you're good to them, they're good to you. I start to joke now that when I get up in the morning, I kind of talk to my bacteria as well before I talk to anybody else, you know, and tell them that, you know, I'm about to give them a very good breakfast, and, you know, I'll keep them happy throughout the day.
I love it. Judith, you have been amazing. I feel like I could do a couple more of these episodes because we learned so much. So can you tell everyone where they can find you, where they can get your book?
Well, my book you can buy at Amazon or Barnes and Noble or you know, any bookstore. It's called You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, and it really looks at the intergenerational effect of things like poor nutrition. And you can visit me at my website, judithfinlayson.com.
Thank you so much, Judith. It was such a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast. Make sure to visit Jana's website, bestholisticlife.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, or listen there so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you simply tell a friend about the show. That'll help too. Let's change the world together, one health expert at a time. Looking forward to seeing you next time.